we were sitting on the same table last evening, and you suggested to ask this question. I'm asking now to put this question now in satsang time. I have a Buddhist background. I have been a Buddhist monk for 20 years.
Just to clarify this, I didn't suggest the question. Manfred asked me the question, and I said, please keep that for satsang.
Sorry. Yes.
I just didn't want you to think that I was planting a question in.
Yes. So my question yesterday evening was to Rupert. He told me he is not. What did he say? He said he is out of duty.
Off duty. Yeah.
So I had to. So I have to
for
ask.
For meals, I'm only available talking about our favourite movies, our children.
Yes.
Not our relationships.
So this would be the time to ask the concepts of karma and rebirth. I wonder how they fit in that view of non-duality.
Okay, so I'm going to now introduce the metaphor that Jake mentioned yesterday, Bernardo Kastrup's metaphor of the whirlpool. All these different metaphors that I use, they all have that they're all have a certain explanatory power to illuminate one aspect of our experience. And this Bernardo's whirlpool metaphor is very nice in relation to past lives and future lives. And so just very briefly, the river in this analogy is consciousness, the water in the river, the flowing water. And the reason it's a flowing river and not a static lake is because in this approach, in this tantric approach that we explore here, consciousness isn't just still, silent. It also has the capacity to vibrate within itself and assume all the forms of experience. So in this analogy, the river of consciousness, the water of consciousness is flowing, moving, vibrating. And in the river, whirlpools develop. The whirlpools are localizations of the water. You can't take a whirlpool out of the river and say, here is a whirlpool independent of the river. There is no actual thing called a whirlpool. The whirlpool is just a configuration of the only thing, if we can call it a thing, that is there, which is the water. So the whirlpool in this analogy is the finite mind, each of our minds, each of us. There is nothing to us or our experience other than the movement of consciousness. But this consciousness, in order to appear in the form of experience, localizes itself in the form of each of our minds, just as the river localizes itself as the whirlpool. That's the analogy. So when the whirlpool begins to disintegrate, the energies that went into the make of the whirlpool begin to relax and disband, and they dissolve back into the stream back into the water from which they originated, just as when our minds delocalize. And in fact, this process happens every night when we go from the very narrow, focused waking state. Our minds begin to relax and expand. They go through the dream state, they relax and expand further, they go through the personal and collective unconscious. I didn't do a very good job last night of explaining this. And then eventually they relax all the way back to the peace of deep sleep. So as the whirlpool, that is our mind, as it relaxes, it loses its form. Just as at night our mind loses its form as it travels back and back and back to deep sleep. So the whirlpool loses its form, but as it loses its form, at a certain point, the integrity of the whirlpool is lost. You can no longer point and say, there is a whirlpool in the river. But nevertheless, the energies that went into the make of the whirlpool still exist in the broader medium of the river, although they are no longer gathered together with a particular form. So this, in your tradition, in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, would be equivalent to a state after the death of the body, when the energies of the mind still live in some disembodied form in consciousness. They're still there in some kind of bardo state, but no longer coalesced into the form of a finite mind. So now we have the ripples, the leftover energies from the whirlpool are now just ripples floating in the river. And there's nothing to suggest that as the river flows, that these ripples will not coalesce again downstream and form another center or localization in the river. In other words, there's nothing to suggest that the ripples, the energies that were left over from the dispersal of the first whirlpool will not remain for some time in the river without a form, and later, downstream, localize again and form the basis of a new whirlpool. Now that new whirlpool will be made partly from the leftover ripples from the first whirlpool, but it will also be made of the ripples that surround it in its new location. So the new whirlpool will be a brand new whirlpool that in some respects has no relation to the previous whirlpool, but there will be some residue left over from the previous whirlpool which will go into the make of the new whirlpool. All that's there still is water. All that's there is the water of consciousness. All there is to these two whirlpools was consciousness and its activity. So this model explains how the leftover energies of the body-mind that dies and disbands into the broader medium of consciousness could remain for some time in consciousness and then gather together to form the next localization or body-mind. And that would be an interpretation of previous lives, future lives, karma, but without recourse to a separate self that reincarnates, without the idea that there is an individual self that reincarnates from lifetime to lifetime. It is more like a gathering of energies that coalesce to form the body-mind that each of us is, and then disbands, and then coalesces again.
Yeah, I wonder where are the differences coming from, from, let's say, newborn babies.
A newborn baby would be a whirlpool that is just beginning to form in the river. And as the baby grows, the whirlpool will attract to itself more and more ripples from its environment, so the whirlpool will grow both in size and in complexity. As more and more ripples from the surrounding water enter into its own body, the body of the whirlpool. That this would be how the child grows, how it is nourished by its environment physically, emotionally, mentally, and it grows, that the whirlpool grows.
Yes, it grows, but it grows very differently.
Yes, because differently from...
one can see that babies, or maybe few month old babies, they already have very different tendencies.
Yes, because the ripples that go into the make of one little whirlpool may be very different from the quality of the ripples that go into the make of another little whirlpool. For instance, you might have one, this is hugely simplified, but you might have one little baby whirlpool that begins to form in an area of the river that is very silent, just the mildest fluctuations on the surface that gather together to form this pristine, beautiful little whirlpool, whereas 20 meters downstream over the rapids, the water may be flowing in a very turbulent way, and therefore the ripples are very agitated, and therefore the baby whirlpool that forms just beyond the rapids will be made out of ripples that are very agitated, and the little whirlpool that forms will be a bundle of conflict and energy and agitation.
And the fact that it is like this, do you think it has nothing to do with the quality of the prior?
Absolutely, absolutely. That's what I'm saying, that it does. Part of what goes into the make of each new whirlpool comes from the old whirlpool. Not all of it, because part of the local ripples, that is, the ripples that come from our environment, from our education, they also form the make of the new whirlpool. But let's say, for the sake of the conversation, that 50% of the new whirlpool is made up of the energies, the residual energies from the previous whirlpool, and therefore will share some of the characteristics of the previous whirlpool. So what the previous whirlpool thought about and felt and did during its life, which will be translated into ripples, will go into the make of the new whirlpool.